Joining me, Patrick Rucker. He's a finance reporter for the Capital Forum and contributor at ProPublica. Patrick, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Your piece you co-wrote with Maya Miller and David Armstrong, How Cigna Saves Millions by Having Its Doctors Reject Claims Without Reading Them, details really the methodology of the way that insurance companies more or less make their money, which is to prevent people from getting health care. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the way they're in the business of selling people a product and not having to fulfill the promise of that product as much as possible. Let's just start with, how did you guys find out that Cigna was using this methodology to perfect the business practice of not providing the product, essentially, that they imply they're going to provide for you?
Yeah, essentially, the insurer makes a promise to the patient, which is, look, you might not like all of our decisions, but we are going to treat your care seriously. We're going to, if your doctor says you need a certain thing, we are only going to question that judgment if we can provide our own doctor who's equally trained and has his own opinion that says it's wrong. And then, in your mind, you can imagine a fair playing field where, like, their doctors and your doctors can sit down in good faith and figure something out. So what was happening was Cigna.
And wait, I just got to stop you here too. We should say that's after the fact, right? I mean, just right, even like
claims.
Yeah. I mean, like I feel like that's a very charitable perspective on the way that they present it. But as a customer, nobody's ever said that to me. Like, nobody's ever said, like, our doctor's going to consult with your doctor and we're going to make this assessment. No, I don't know. Like, this is, I don't even know how to buy it. Back in the old days, I didn't know how to buy a stereo. You go into Tweeter, et cetera, and they'll sell you like something with a big woofer, because you're just like, I don't know. I certainly don't know anything about medicine. So the assumption is, like, if the doctor says I need it, the insurance company is going to provide it.
I think that's a fair starting point. And if they were going to challenge it, and you got a letter that you opened and it was signed by a doctor and says, I, Dr. Patrick, say that this is not necessary, you might be thrown for a minute, like, well, gosh, I mean, my doctor said I need it, and this is a doctor and they said I don't need it, so maybe I am confused. But in fact, as we report, these doctors are signing tens and thousands of these denials without even looking at the patient file. They just get a stack placed on their desk. It's already primed with the denial language, and they more or less stamp it with their electronic signature, and they go flying out of Cigna. And United Healthcare has a similar program where they say, under doctor's signature, denied. And as a reporter who covered the financial crisis, I can tell you it rang very similar to the Robo-signing scandal of 10, 12 years ago, which was, the bank's like, well, these guys don't have a right to their house, so we got to get them out one way or the other. And more or less, this paperwork's okay, so let's just find a way to sign this and move on. And in fact, as the scandal broke, these signatures that were taken to be by a qualified person, these notarized legal documents, had not been looked at in any meaningful way. And I think any fair reader would look at what's happening at Cigna, United Healthcare, and ask if this isn't the same thing.
You talk about one doctor, the doctor that, I guess, the subject of the piece, who has happened coincidentally, or maybe not so much of a coincidence. Maybe that's why this happened. You have a Dr. Van Teradine whose claims got rejected by a Dr. Cheryl Dopke, and you report that Dopke denied 60,000 claims in 1 month, which, rough math. I don't know how many, I'm assuming she's not working on the weekends. She's working like what, 22 days a month, work days. That's 3,000 claims a day that she is denying. And I think he broke it down to 1.2 seconds on each case that they're denying, saying that the treatment provided was unnecessary, and so we're not going to cover it.
You summed it up. I don't know And Cigna didn't answer how anyone could conceivably look at and make a meaningful. I mean, I can't scratch my head in 2 seconds. So I don't know anyone who would expect someone to make a medical decision in less than 2 seconds. And as we report, they don't even look at the file. So the mystery's sort of solved. They're not making a medical decision. They're not opening a file. They're just getting stacks of denials and signing them.
And they're not actually even physically signing them, because I don't even think you could do that 1.2 seconds. They're just like clicking a button, and they're authorizing. Okay. So how did you guys first come to understand that this was happening at Cigna?
Well, suffice to say, there's enough people within the insurance industry, doctors who had other walks of life, maybe other administrators who came into this profession, and things just didn't sit well with them. And things frankly gnawed at them that they were doing, or that they saw either directly or out of the corner of their eye, that were not, didn't seem fair or on the level. And this is one of them.
What are the requirements in this instance, right? I mean, because I know you guys in the piece talk about that you approached regulators, and the regulator said, this doesn't sound right. But like, what statutory requirements does Cigna have, and do they change from state to state? Like, this sounds horrible, but is it illegal or contrary to their requirements under what auspices?
There is health insurance is, without dragging the viewer into too much into the weeds on this, there's different types of health care that are regulated different ways. A big chunk of it is regulated at the state level. So that's 50 state insurance commissioners. You can go online right now and type in wherever you live, like, who's my state insurance commissioner? And it's probably somebody you've never heard of. Very few of them are elected. Most of them are appointed by the governor. And those people are responsible for policing the industry. And there is a general, I can't answer for every state, but there is a template for a fraud statute that is floating around, has been floating around for more than a couple of decades, about fair treatment. And fair treatment includes essentially that you've reviewed my case in a meaningful way. What any of those state regulators are going to do about the story and the facts that we presented, we're asking those questions now. But I think if anyone, this makes you uneasy, you need to get in touch with your regulator, because they might have answers that we haven't been able to get.
How many states does Cigna operate in?
It's big. I mean, it's one of the top 10 operators. I don't know. I'm sure they have at least a smudge in every state, but I don't know. It started out as a Connecticut company. It's been merged in many different ways. They administer reviews for other companies. They have like specialty review systems. So even Cigna, there's a company called Evacor. Some viewers might know about that. They do reviews on like radiology, scans, specialists who do blood work tests. They go under the Cigna umbrella, and yet they're due to a lot of consolidation. They're all over the place. Sorry, just to say, United Healthcare, which is the largest provider, as we say in the story, is doing something, essentially conceived this thing even before Cigna. So our understanding, this practice is pretty widely in place.
Well, that was going to be my question. Is there any reason to believe that all of the insurance companies aren't doing this? I mean, if Cigna, let's put it this way. If Cigna, one of the biggest companies, is spending 1.2 seconds per application essentially for care and rejecting them in 1.2 seconds, how could any other insurance company even begin to compete with that if they weren't doing something similar?
Just on the basis of a cost-saving tool or a cost avoidance tool, it'd be hard to beat this system. So these guys have a lot of incentives to develop ways to save money. So we need to do more work, but I think you're right. It's hard to imagine that something that is this effective hasn't caught on more widely. And just to say one thing, I mean, one of the guys who conceived it is in the story.
Yeah,
I mean, he
Mooney,
estimates
is that his name? Mooney,
yeah. Who's now advising, he's more or less retired, but he also has some roles advising private equity and other investors about how to get the most out of their insurance investments and their insurance operations. But he estimates billions of dollars saved for the industry through this practice.
Okay, and let's talk about that. When we say billions saved, he tries to make the argument this is keeping the cost of insurance down. But if that was the case, if Cigna was saving so much money from this, their insurance would be markedly less expensive than anybody else's product, right? I mean, in other words, these savings, and it really, it's almost a perversion of the word, because it's like, these are, it's arguably fraudulent on some level. These savings are really just shareholder dividends, right? I mean, this is all almost exclusively going into the profit making of the industry. This is the way they make money. They deny claims.
They never stop trying to find ways to deny claims. That's a fair statement. I don't know anyone who's going to dispute that, because they want to, as you started to say, every penny they don't have to pay out in a premium or in a payout to a patient is money they get to keep. What they do with that money is up to them. Do they want to give it to their shareholders? Maybe they give some to their clients, to their big employers who rely on Cigna to operate their healthcare system. Maybe, but we don't know. We do know that it's up to Cigna to decide what to do with that money they saved.
Right. But I guess my point is, there's no obvious evidence that this is in some way suppressing the cost of health insurance. The savings that they're getting here are more than likely ending up as profit, as opposed to like, this is what's really depressing the cost of health insurance, which of course goes up, exponentially every year almost.
Judging by the cost of health insurance, judging by the massive amount of money that's spent on executive compensation, I think that question is hanging out there. Yeah.
Is the DOJ, is this something the DOJ would look at? I mean, I understand it's insurance regulators on a state-by-state basis, but I also would imagine that Cigna participates in ACA exchanges. I would imagine that there are, there's got to be some federal investment in these insurance companies not denying claims. And we should also, we'll get to that in a moment, but has the DOJ, have you guys gotten a comment from the DOJ about this?
This would take, I think in the first place, someone who's got to take some initiative, whether that's Justice Department, a U.S. attorney, attorney general of a state, one of these insurance commissioners. Some are more aggressive about consumer protections than others. We're going to keep reporting this, but I think these are fair questions, and the more that these questions get raised, they're going to have to answer them, but to us or to viewers and listeners or somebody. But no, we're asking if there's anything to be done about this.
You also mentioned that, can you distinguish why this is different than the way that Medicare and Medicaid go about these, making these determinations?
It gets back to this promise that the private insurer makes. And I hear what you're saying. Like, maybe some people are so cynical, not so cynical, they've got reason to think that they don't take this in good faith. But if you just take them in good faith and they say to you, we are going to review your claim in a meaningful way. Medicare and Medicaid, they don't ever make that promise. And not because they're like cold-hearted, just because like, look, we were on a really lean ship. We don't have profits. We don't have all these other complicated financing stuff. We just, apply, appeal is a process you can turn to, but we're very straightforward. You want to appeal, it's straightforward. You get a yes or no answer. It's the private insurers operate by a different system where there's this implied promise that they're going to, if they're going to fight you, if they're going to say no, they're going to have to get someone in a lab coat to say that this doesn't work. It's not just going to be a bureaucrat or some administrator.
And they built in and do projections on how the appeal process is going to go. I mean, to appeal this is like, one of those things where, I subscribe to whatever it is. I buy a subscription on an app, and then I can't figure out how to cancel it, and I just give up, and I just keep paying the $2 a month or whatever it is. They built that into their process. That's part of their business plan too. Will you talk about what you've written about that as well?
Sure. Let's say the vitamin D. Well, there was another example we use of a test. It's a test for, we use the test for diabetes or other like autoimmune diseases, but it's essentially a test of, does Patrick sweat in a normal way when that's stimulated? Does Patrick have good balance? It's a battery of tests like that. And Cigna decided we don't want to pay for this anymore. And the policy was going to be on Monday, we pay for all of them, because this is sort of important. These are really only processes that cost a few $100. That Cigna for a very long period of time was like, it just costs too much money to fight these. Just pay the thing. Just pay them all. So on Monday they would pay them all, and on Tuesday they would deny them all. And the difference was only that they would say, we have a medical director has decided this is not necessary. What did that mean? It just meant that someone had rubber stamped this denial paperwork. So getting back to your question, which would be something that they would feel like they could deny, and people might howl about it a little bit, but they'll probably just stomach it. One was this balance and sweat test. It's called an autonomic nervous system test. As we got a presentation, a corporate document that shows how they had it down to the dollar about how much they thought how much it cost, what percentage of people would appeal. It was low single digits. So they're like, based on this spreadsheet, they're like, well, not that many people. So even if we had to reverse ourselves and pay for all those, it's not that much money. They estimate that as well. So yeah, very much. Let's just say that number was 50%. And that's, it's not 5% of people are going to howl about this, but it's half the people we say no to are going to howl about it. You can bet that would change the formula for whether or not they would go ahead and try to deny all these claims.
All right. So just to be clear, what's going on here, again, their business plan is not what will keep the patients the most healthy. Their business plan is what will cut, like, what is the number of denials that we can get to where the denial is at a certain dollar figure, that it's going to impose the cost on the patient, that it is too small amount worth their time to climb the hurdles that we will put in front of them at a certain cost to us, so that we can basically say, like, this wall is impenetrable. And then people will just not want to engage in the appeal process, and they'll just give up. And there's a lot of like assessment and analysis, and certainly more than 1.2 seconds to going into making those calculations but it has nothing to do with medicine, nothing to do with the health of the patient, has all to do with like what is the amount of resistance we can provide that will make it not worthwhile the customer, the patient, to fight this, is basically their calculation. And that's the way they figure out whether they're going to deny or approve a claim, as opposed to having anything to do with your health whatsoever.
We talk to a lot of doctors inside the industry, outside of the industry. We've reviewed hundreds and hundreds of documents, and I can tell you that nowhere do we see anything about the decision. They will talk about the health of the patient, yes, in a kind of an oblique way, but that is not at the heart of what they're talking about. It's either how long is this going to take and how much is this going to cost, would be the key metrics you see again and again.
And just as an example you guys gave in the story of a denial was a doctor called for a blood test, suspecting that there was some vitamin deficiency that the person you were writing about had. And they found that he did in fact have a vitamin D deficiency, to the extent that it could have like implicated the integrity of his bones. But they said the calling for that test was unnecessary because there was no evidence prior to the test that he had a deficiency in the vitamin, which of course you could only know through the test. I mean, this is Joseph Heller Catch-22 stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, I was reading that and writing that and thinking, is this going to land the way it does to me? Because it was like you said, it was a paradox, Orwellian, I don't know what, but you're right. we do not believe that you qualify to get this test because you have no evidence of having done this test. Yeah, Joseph Heller would be nodding along to that, I think.
Absolutely crazy. It's a great piece of reporting. I hope somebody in the Department of Justice or in some U.S. attorney's office or state regulator's office is reading this, because it is just a, I mean, frankly, I happen to believe that they can't survive without doing this kind of stuff. And, you know, if we had regulators who were really on the ball about it, these insurance companies, the industry, their business plan doesn't work if they're supposed to do what they're supposed to do. And so these things are, it's really important piece of reporting, and I appreciate you coming on to talk about it.
Thanks for having me.